name of marginally trending game I can leech views off of, and the topic I actually want to talk about style videos, or the less cynical variant, game that inspired topic, aren't exactly my cup of tea to say the least. Reason why is because I tend to review everything I play and usually look at games as a whole a lot more, thus rarely ever coming across a topic that takes precedence over everything else worth talking about. But this time things were a bit different. See, I had already reviewed all 3 Crash games, one of which quite recently as well, and I'd rather not waste my time breaking a bunch of records repeating what I said already. Nah, instead, what interested me more than anything was the reception to this bundle of remade games. Some people were overcome with nostalgia, loving the damn thing to bits, yet others, often somewhat uninitiated with these titles, pass it off as charming, but ultimately dated, not controlling all too well with spotty physics and questionable depth perception. A couple of tweets from a certain cute boy called Matt from the Super Best Friends Play channel stood out to me especially. He felt that the game's linear approach, banking on design standards of 2D platformers rather than its 3-dimensional peers, made them feel dated the very day they came out. Which was weird to me, as it nailed exactly what I was saying in my reviews already, only when I brought it up I spun it in a positive direction. Like, yeah, they didn't innovate much, but as a result also forwent the trappings that caused games like Mario or Donk 64 to have aged poorly, and so, left as a confused, doubting, and insecure husk of my former self, I figured that both of these stances would be worth exploring, and that it would also be cool to try and discern what aging really means for a video game, and how that applies to the PS1 era of gaming and the titular Bandicoot himself. The Nintendo Entertainment System. A console loved by many and a console laden with classics, most of which laying down a rough outline of what video games would end up being. Ninja Gaiden had the cutscenes, Mario the tight controls and excelled in game feel. Sweet Home brought the spooks, and Zelda and Final Fantasy both brought adventure of the action and JRPG varieties. And that's not even half of it. However, shit's also old. Like, far before I was born old, and so I find a lot of these games really hard to go back to. I kinda like Zelda 2, the music sure as shit was hype as fuck, and Final Fantasy can still be fun, I guess, but man, my woman, I'd be lying if I said that any of those titles really kept my interest. See, I grew up with the PS1 and 2 primarily, and so most of what I played were games with heavy story elements, cinematic directing, adult themes, and at least on the PS2 side of things, less experimental vibes and a lot more expertise and polish. Which, of course, largely influenced my tastes going forward. On a similar token, it's not too uncommon to see people in their late 30s complaining about how games have too many cutscenes or how they hold your hand too much, and other such complaints that, well, are mostly true, but it's never something I was all that bothered with, as it's pretty much what I grew up with in the first place. To me, something like Final Fantasy 1, while still a neat game, just lacks all of the grandiose worlds, characters, and plot twists of what I've come to expect from that series. Reason why I'm rambling this up, by the way, wasn't to say that my childhood was better or worse than anyone else's, but instead to showcase how one's age dictates one's barometer of quality and what the dominating opinions will be for a said generation, which in turn severely muddles the stipulations of a work of art aging and whether or not if it did so poorly. Here's an example. The original Castlevania for the NES set itself apart by being a game not really about the sheer volume of dude beat-upage or about jumping your way past many an obstacle, but instead about slowly and meticulously navigating your way through complex and well-planned out levels filled to the brim with enemies utilizing unique attack patterns not entirely unlike the hottest shit game journal meme of the day, Dark Souls. And much like the game that shall not be named that I still did name just now, the contextual feel of the overall combat is interesting to say the least, as pushing a button to attack did not immediately result in said attack. It was more like committing to a type of wind-up period in a way, causing the player to play with a sense of deliberacy over mindlessly hacking away with the insurance of each hit landing. Anyway, to sum shit up, while Castlevania certainly feels a bit weird to play, there is no denying that the game was intently designed to be that way. I mean, I don't think they would have made all enemies, well, most enemies at least, you fucking Medusa heads, function around the delay if it wasn't. So if you view that game from that mindset, comparing it to other titles from its era, you wouldn't be wrong in thinking that the game's aged pretty fucking gracefully. However, not everyone's going to be able to do that. Like, if you have no reference to reference, things like the delay or the grueling difficulty, the pixel palette mush that is the game's graphical style, and the asshole enemies are more than likely gonna trigger a response along the lines of, "Fuck this game, it is old." That's pretty much how I felt when I first emulated it at least a few years ago, and I wasn't exactly charitable towards the original Zelda or Mario either.
But then, through years and years of old boys indoctrination by way of early screw attack garbage, your weekly ragey reviewer tropes, and the overbearing zeitgeist, I too
was led to think that something like Battletoads was actually good. And now, in
current year,
we're already seeing people of my age starting to perpetuate similar shit about ye olden PS1 games. Tank controls don't suck. They're clearly meant to be like that. The lack of control creates tension and helps with the changing camera angles. I mean, when you're struggling to even move properly, those zombies are gonna be mad threatening. Yet, at the same time, the sole reason as to why the traditional survival horror genre up and vanished about a decade ago, with its last few whimpers not even using tank controls and thus controlling like poopy doo-doo, was because of said tank controls continuously pissing off reviewers who obviously didn't grow up with that shit. That isn't to say that they were wrong entirely, mind you. Not sure why Croc the Legend of the Gobos, for instance, necessarily needed the grueling tension of a first-grade horror game, but in terms of the original 3 Resident Evil games at least, as well as Silent Hill, the Castlevania argument stands. These games were meant to play like that, and function just fine and dandy once you get used to it. Though, I still started to wonder, when a game needs about a dozen caveats to be made fun to play still, could you consider that having aged well?
buckle up, boyo. Let's find out.
Arguably, the area in which games tend to age worst of all is gameplay. I mean, if titles like Two Finger Death Punch have proven anything to me, is that a game can look like absolute dog shit and still be fun as long as the gameplay is rock solid. And looking at the PS1, it's not hard to see how many gameplay elements ended up looking a bit rough. Thing was that because of the 3D, a lot of genres had to be completely reconsidered from the ground up. After all, how do you Mario when struggling with depth perception, or how do you deal with the player getting lost in the more open 3D areas, and moreover, how do camera do? Here and there, some devs actually managed to find some pretty decent alternatives, believe it or not. Ideas like just straight up locking the camera down, rendering most issues moot entirely, or using breadcrumb guidance by way of spamming collectibles, and also some genuinely revolutionary concepts like Z-targeting, iterations of which still persist today, but suffice it to say, the scathingly vast majority were certainly a lot less fortunate. The wall-clipping camera of Mario 64 is a good example of this for one, as are the horribly clunky first-person control schemes of games like GoldenEye, Echo Knight, and Kingsfield. Hell, even if things barely needed to be reconsidered at all, there were still plenty of other technicalities that could get in the way, like the slow, drawn-out animations bloated with cinematics in just about every single JRPG to hit the PS1. Seriously, even the best ones like Final Fantasy IX still feel noticeably slower compared to more modern, snappier efforts like World of Final Fantasy or Persona 5. Though, as stated, a lot of these problems are barely detrimental once gotten used to, but it's the getting used to that's the issue I'm attempting to peel away at here. Cause looking at more modern games, even the really hard ones, you can essentially just pick them up without making any odd concessions whatsoever. Control schemes are uniform now, tutorials are often integrated well as well, and third and first person camera controls have been fine-tuned to near perfection on both controllers and keyboard and mouse configurations to varying degrees. And so, one could argue that simply having to adjust is a sign of a game having aged badly. Or at least, judging from the way that certain reviews are written, that's what I think people mean when they say that. I wouldn't really be the one to make that argument though. I figured that it would be fun to explore with my lazily written surface-level anal cyst facade that I like so much, but to me personally, a game is aged just fine when the attendant amount of fun can still be derived from it, concessions or no. Aging poorly is not a phrase I like using much, I guess. It's just seeing it in use so often around my main man Crash B gets a boy to think. So, if I'd have to choose an example or two of what I define as having aged poorly, I'd give the example of Tekken 1. At its time, it was the cream of the cock, but due to all of its sequels and peers introducing so fucking much, playing it now is but a frustrating experience.
Watch my Tekken retrospective to find out more!
I'd argue just about the same for most 2D beat-em-ups as well. Some can still be fun, absolutely, but when set side by side the sheer breadth of features brought on by modern brawlers a la Platinum and Clovercry, these games start to feel incredibly bare. Anyway, bringing all of this back to Crash, I'm still keeping up the pretense, you guys, trust me. His games don't really suffer these issues if you ask me. See, Naughty Dog quite literally translated the linear 2D platformer into 3D with very few alterations. You can jump, you can spin at things, and really, it's just about as simple of a game as you can get. I mean, hell, about half of the damn things are still in 2D just as well, and where there were a few moments here and there where a panning camera can tear your asshole a new one, thus leaving you with two assholes, those occurrences are kept to a minimum, as shit remains pretty much static either way. It works, or so I thought, as Matt's tweets did get me to think about these titles a lot. Sure, I was having fun playing them, which, again, is the most important thing to me, but I have been known to look past and find enjoyment in many a jank, and also, I know these games like the back of my own dick, and so, with pants held up high, down to the belt store I went, with but one burning question in mind. Does Crash hold up? Actually though, bro. So, here's my case. Comparing it to other 3D platformers is pointless, as it plays absolutely nothing like them. Functionally, it's so much more in the vein of Donk, I feel, being tight platforming challenges without gimmicky mechanics, purely relying on pure jumpage, and pattern-based enemies essentially being obstacles all on their own. And so that's what I'ma compare these bitches to as well. Traditional 2D platformers. A genre that has developed like a fucking cancer over the past 10 years and has now seen just about every spin that could be spun on its titular mechanical nips. And yeah, holding Crash B-Ball outside of the school to the standards of games like Super Meat Shovel and Boy Night is not gonna make it look good. It's pretty okay still when viewed purely as a less sadistic 3D Donkey Kong Country, but man, it's just too simple. At its time, the series benefited a lot from being in 3D, essentially blinding people to the reality of it actually just being a game in which you jump over holes. It increases in difficulty, sure, and it certainly improves upon itself with every entry as well, but it doesn't really build upon the idea of a platformer much at all, mechanically speaking. Not that being simple is in any way bad either, but when you have so much more interesting, complex, or engaging styles of 2D platforming to choose from, I don't think many people would pick Crash. The only major hold I'd say that it has over everything else is the fact that it has some of the tightest level design on the block. Seriously, once you get that timing down pat, you can keep on running non-stop. The enemies, the gap spacing, the rotation of the rotating platforms, and the triggering of the fiery doom goblets all line up perfectly across all levels across all three games. Sometimes in sync with the music as well, amplifying it to platforming greatness. Well, that is if you're actually good at the game. If the Sane Trilogy has taught me anything through watching other people play, is that these games are fucking hard. To me, this shit is like second nature as I played them a billion times, but when you don't know what's next, especially in Crash 1, every single death pit and enemy could end up having your name on it. It's probably a lot more frustrating than it is fun, and now I suddenly feel a kinship with the grandpa-ass Mega Man men, preaching about how good those games are and that you can jump and shoot. Yet here I am being all like, nah bitch, shit's fucking unplayable. Also, the character's dead now anyway. Nobody cares. Meanwhile, when you actually grew up playing Mega Man like a proper dad, nothing of what makes those games unplayable exists to you. You've essentially memorized all of it and can only see that which makes the game so legendary. He's like special to you and stuff. Worth salvaging or rebooting even, despite that on the broader cultural spectrum, he's about as relevant to modern gaming as, well, as Crash Bandicoot. Which is also unplayable apparently, and also literally one big Dark Souls meme now.
What? Who put this stolen Twitter joke in there?
I remember back on an episode of Yahtzee's now deceased Let's Drown Out podcast, he stated that he couldn't imagine anyone thinking fondly of early PS1 graphics. This was in 2014 when Vaporwave was booming, a large part of which centering around awkward FMV nostalgia and Dreamcast level graphics, both perpetuated by teenagers and 20-year-olds. 'Twas but an old manism, I suppose, but it just goes to show that you should never underestimate that thing, that what people say where there's flaws of past media end up becoming the defining features of the new one. You know, that quote. Bitch. Still, I keep getting rather mixed reactions when I prop up the idea that the original Silent Hill is its own art style. The grunge, the grain, the texture warp all collide to make some of the thickest, huskiest texture work. Is beautiful. Mwah. Like a big, dumb, gory pop-up picture book. In my opinion, it would be unjust to just chalk that up to simple nostalgia blindness too. I mean, I've never even played the very first Silent Hill back in the day. I wouldn't first touch it until only about a year ago. To tie it all back to what Yahtzee said anyway, we've already seen efforts like back in 1995 and the ever so sexy looking band Memories attempting to recreate exactly that. So, yeah, take that, 30-year-olds. In Crash Bandicoot's case though, I'd say that the graphics kinda have their own charm to them as well. That isn't to say that the new HD remake doesn't look fucking stunning, which it does, but something about a jungle being caked in pixel textures with harsh angular angles makes it seem appropriately hostile and jungly. Certain details stand out more too. A cute little butterfly butterflying around, or the dingy drippy drips from the sewage pipes in Crash 2 have a certain artistic merit to them that their more realistic counterparts seem to lack. Or at least do differently. It's like the difference between an image of an angry banana cat or a hand-drawn painting of an angry banana cat. Both are absolutely gorgeous in their own ways, but one certainly draws a bit more attention to itself. Certain games even benefit from this in a mechanical sense. Pixel hunting in an adventure game, for example, is a lot easier when all examinable objects are this clearly defined.
Looking at you, Hotel Dusk, you saucy slut.
And climbable surfaces in a game like Tomb Raider are much more recognizable too. Well, most of the time. Either way, the jitteriness of the textures, besides giving Squall a bad case of oatmeal face, can also give off an effect similar to film grain in a way. It sure does in the aforementioned Silent Hill, and this dude called Sinclair Strange sure as fuck seems to be capitalizing on this idea as well.
Oh god, it looks so amazing.
But of course, that doesn't mean that things can end up going a bit fuck either. NES games had sprite flickering, and PS1 games have texture warping, polygon clipping, and low-ass resolutions and sub-30 frame rates across the boards, and fuck that. But in general, I do feel that PS1 era graphics will be making a comeback in a fashion similar to how pixel art has done over the past 10 years or so. Oh, and also, pre-rendered backgrounds looked fucking amazing, okay? And I would frame the fuck out of this shot from Final Fantasy VII, and we really need a game to come along utilizing them again. Only then with, like, modern CG and better image compression, cause bruh, the last crop of games that still used these looked fucking leagues above everything else. In the end though, I would say that the people who think Final Fantasy VII still holds up as a marvel of storytelling, or think that RE1 is still terrifying, or those who think that Crash is an amazing platformer with a sense of deliberacy are fucking delusional as shit. But hey, that's fine, as so am I. I remember looking at people gushing over shit like Mega Man and how much fun it is, and just thinking to myself, ha! Old! Which they are, but that doesn't mean that there isn't any merit to their enjoyment of what they're enjoying. Especially when they're able to properly quantify how and also voice why to then, like, better the art of game design philosophy and shit. Both views have their merits, and I don't think it's as easy as saying something has aged per se as having made this, I kind of feel like that word has lost all concrete meaning. Saying the original Zelda, for example, was a masterpiece and the first ever open world game, and oh, I have so many fond memories of discovering how you bombed the Bombadongo or whatever the fuck is important for roughly the same reasons as maybe actually coming to terms with the fact that it's an abhorrently unplayable piece of garbo that lacks any sense of direction or design. One view leads to people having a gay old time and maybe taking that about it which works and evolving it into better things, and the other view gets us to abolish those flaws and then hope that we may only see them upon fondly looking back.